Before we begin, I want to make it clear that I'm not here to debate if Bigfoot is a real biological creature. We are not concerned with physical evidence or tracing an accurate history of the beast. Whether you think Bigfoot is an actual hominid or an alien or a forest spirit isn't important to this discussion. It is the experience of the supernatural we are here to discuss. But first, we must go to once upon a time when I was a little girl. Every summer, my younger sister and I would stay with our grandparents at the southern tip of Puget Sound. My family had been in that area for 4 generations, and the weird, foreboding energy in the forest behind the house was known to many. The Northwest is a spooky place to grow up, with its perpetual gloom and impenetrable wilderness, and my grandparents' house was nestled on a hillside near Mud Bay, with nothing behind for miles and miles, except forestry land and logging roads, until you reach the Olympic National Forest, and nothing ahead but the Black Hills and the mysterious Mima Mounds. My sister and I would sleep in the musty attic playroom with its gold shag carpeting and faux walnut paneling, windows open to let the earth-scented breeze carry in the sound of the occasional lonely late-night trucker on the rural interstate. On this particular night, I had no idea what had woken me, but I laid there in the dark, listening to the sound of my sister sleeping, the tick of the grandfather clock downstairs, the wind through the leaves outside. Then I heard it again, the distant, hollow roar, unlike anything I had ever heard before, cut through the night. It sounded like a man impersonating a gorilla, or maybe a gorilla impersonating a man. I don't know. Only this was much, much larger than either of those things. I was a biology nerd and loved reading about sharks and dinosaurs, and I had heard and seen bear and cougars as my family were avid campers and hikers. But we never went into the deep backcountry areas, so my young mind was willing to accept that this could just be something I'd never come across. But this sounded so much larger, as if the forest itself was the source. There was a sentient rage in its howls, and it frightened me. I laid there, my blood turning to river water as it shrieked a few more times, and then fell silent. It had sounded far away enough that I didn't feel threatened, perhaps a few miles even, as the acoustics in these parts tend to be rich. But still, the completely unknowable source of these horrible screams was unsettling, and the aggression in those cries was unmistakable. Something was staking out its territory, and whatever it was the biggest badass motherfucker in the timberland. I eventually fell back asleep and said nothing to my family of what I had heard. I'm not sure why, perhaps part of me just couldn't deal with the possible answers. Years later, in the early 2000s, I came across the alleged recording of a Bigfoot encounter in Puyallup, Washington in 1971. As I listened to the recording, I recognized that hollow, impossible roar, and the memory flooded back to me. I'd never forgotten that night, but I had chalked it up to childhood confabulation. 30 years later, I was again confronted with the question, Did I hear Bigfoot as a child? Truthfully, who can say? Growing up in the very heart of Bigfoot country, I was more than aware of his existence. My elementary school's mascot was the Sasquatch, and in the Back to Nature 70s, the image of the shaggy wild man was embraced as a countercultural hero. Programs like In Search Of and films like The Legend of Boggy Creek were everywhere. This could have easily been a false memory or wishful thinking or any other number of skeptical conclusions. But when we are talking about matters of myth and legend, does the question of physical existence matter? There is a difference between what we believe and what we experience. I experienced Bigfoot as a phenomenon. There is nothing in this experience that contradicts science, because it is not the same as claiming something like the Earth is flat. There is plenty of clear physical evidence that the Earth is not flat. But proving something I internally experience isn't true, or to interpret the meaning of that experience for me, just isn't possible. Qualia are the indescribable experiences of the human mind. Pain, tastes, smells, colors, emotions. We can compare them to other things, but I will never really know what blue looks like to you or how much you love your kids. I cannot prove these things exist or are true for you, but that does not determine their reality. The acceptance of a supernatural actor into your reality is a personal experience and is not categorically the same as declaring it a manifest reality for one and all. Facts matter. Science matters. But we cannot apply science to things we cannot measure. And the gut feelings of others are completely immeasurable. Bigfoot exists. When I say the name Bigfoot to you, you know what I'm talking about. You can see what one looks like. You may even know the sound I am describing. Bigfoot is real because we have made him real. Like we have made other thought forms, like Santa Claus, a reality. Regardless of whether or not there is an actual creature roaming the woods of the Pacific Northwest, we have named it, described it, and given it a backstory that has grown in depth over time. I cringe when I see people desperately trying to poke holes in stories of paranormal or spiritual experiences, because they are often missing the point. The story isn't about if ghosts exist or if aliens are abducting people. The story is part of this individual's experience of the world. And as long as they aren't out to con anyone and they aren't legitimately medically delusional, arguing with them about this experience is about as useful as telling someone they don't really love their kids. It's just hormonal. While this assertion is based in a certain amount of fact, it does not even begin to cover the experience and minimizes the emotional and psychic impact of such a phenomenon. In the end, I know that I heard Bigfoot, because what I heard, I understood to be the voice of the wilderness, reminding me of its ancient power. That cry in the night said, "None shall pass," and the message was received loud and clear by anyone within earshot. Was it possible that the sound I heard had a completely mundane origin? Of course. But in that moment, at that time, I made Bigfoot real. And the power of mythology is that it enables us to see both the natural and the supernatural worlds as overlaying each other, each one moving in tandem, but in its own strange and wonderful way. I'm Miss Scarlett, and this has been Pagan Sunday School. Thank you for watching.